Okay, let's drink a wine. Let's drink the 2007 Barricia Vineyard Zinfandel. What a wonderful old vineyard. This is a wonderfully classic example of California history. This vineyard was originally planted in 1862 by General Joseph Hooker, you know, that Civil War general who believed in ladies of the night and gave them his name. Well, it actually happens to be owned by two women who, one's a lawyer and one's a psychologist. And they like to point out that they're a little far from Hooker's girls. And in fact, they are indeed. This is a vineyard that was replanted, maybe the first vineyard in California put on rootstock, somewhere between 1885 and 1888, planted by George Hurst. So that would be William Randolph Hearst's father. He didn't, build the castle, but he provided the money for it. And that's how William Randolph could do that. And he hung out with Julia Morgan. So there's a lot of scandal around this particular vineyard. So it's a good vineyard. And it's planted in Sonoma Valley. Sonoma Valley is a wonderful place for growing Zinfandel, really one of the first places that grew Zinfandel. In fact, this is where Zinfandel really got its start. It was planted, early by Vallejo, who was the commandant here in the early 1850s. Colonel Harristy was in this area, so very historic location for Zinfandels and a very historic vineyard with very old plantings. So what does that tell you? That tells you it's going to be damn good, of course. But it's got smaller berries, smaller clusters, so you would expect a wine that was big and spicy. And by the way, this particular vineyard is located, along with Old Hill Ranch, in what we call the banana belt of Sonoma Valley. So it sits in the big wind shadow of Sonoma Mountain. It sits here, and the ocean breezes come in, and they kind of work their way around the mountain through the Bennett Valley and through the Petaluma Gap. But they don't really hit this area until later, so it gets longer, warmer days. So the chances of this wine being ripe are good too. But the proof is in the tasting, so this is it. But before we taste it, I want to give you a little bit more information based on the back of the bottle, which is always a good thing if you've got a good back of the bottle. In this particular vineyard, we produced 1,845 cases of this wine. That was slightly more than we usually do for Barricia. It was bottled in April. This vineyard is planted in a certain kind of soil. It's called Tuscan Red Hills Series Gravelly Loam. Well, it looks just like it sounds. It's this kind of rusty looking soil that looks like it belongs in Tuscany and is certainly some of the best soil for growing dry farm vines in California. And in fact, this wine has 14.5% alcohol. So it's not the biggest, hugest wine that we make in our line of wines, but it's pretty good, to say the least. You look at that color, you can see, in fact, that the wine is ripe. The grapes have hung out there for a long time. You can tell that, in fact, the character of the warmth has thickened the skins and has developed these really intense wines. So when you smell this wine, you smell this incredible sort of deep spicy quality, this kind of baking spice quality, which is typical of Sonoma Valley. But you also get this really terrific dark fruit quality with some red tones in around it. You get, a spiced plum note out of it, which is really pretty. But beyond that, you get a vanilla tone, which probably comes from the French oak. You also get this complexity that comes from the native yeast. So you get this really broad, sort of multi-fingered feel to the nose. So let's taste it. Let's see what it tastes like. Boy, my hat's spitting back at me. This is, wow. It's so fresh. It just kind of goes, and it just like lightens up in your mouth. It spreads out, And then there's this kind of very fine tannin that comes along the side of it. And like all the 07s, it's got this long, aromatic finish. This kind of, you're not going to forget me. I know you've swallowed, but you're not going to forget me. I'm going to be right there in your mouth with you for a while. And it tastes really terrific. Yep, I could drink a lot more of that wine. This wine will be around for a very long time. This wine will age quite nicely. The first vintage wine we made in this vineyard was 1998, and that wine is still beautiful and gorgeous. But this is a long-term single vineyard designated wine. It was made by Gunlock Bunchi, it was made by Buena Vista, and I've actually had the pleasure to have some of those wines, and they are still around. So a lot of how a wine ages has to do with how it's made, but even more importantly, it's where it's grown, the kind of components that give it the life and the vigor and the strength that sort of sustain it for a long period of time, just like a human being in many ways. So enjoy it. Enjoy it for a long time. Continue to drink it. It's a terrific wine with a terrific history. You will never get tired of this wine.